We are starting our program. Today we have with us an eminent personality in the field of management and economics, Dr. Roswin Joy, and she is the head of Sustainable Development Goals Center, and she is into Presidency University, Bangalore, India. Before I introduce her, let me just share you about Africa Business School. And we started our journey in 2016, and specifically uh, we have formed this business school to address the most pressing challenges of Africa and the world by partnering with industry to translate the ideas into practice by educating the next generation of people towards culturally aware, socially responsible, critical thinkers, problem solvers, skilled entrepreneurs, and global leaders. And recently we have floated this program on May 4th onwards, Doctorate in Philosophy, PhD program, and it is a fully sponsored program by Africa Business School. And in this program, we associate with industry and the collaborators in an ideal way that should keep fit with diverse field like business analytics, economics, management, human resource management, organizational behavior and leadership, entrepreneurship, finance, and likewise different clusters we have engaged into, but giving thrust to innovation management and entrepreneurship. So this is exactly our the school, and it started in May 4th, and we just completed our orientation program, and we are going ahead with our program today onwards, the exact semester starting, and it will be up to 1 year pre-doctoral period. And in this, we are trying to expose our students to all experts coming from the arena of business management. And fortunately, we have with us today Dr. Roswin Joy, and she will be talking about the sustainable related aspects of business. And she heads the, as I said, she heads the Sustainable Development Goals Center at Presidency University. And she had her expertise in business analytics and economics specifically. And she's also guiding the research scholars in the areas of environmental economics and disaster risk management. And she completed her doctoral studies from one of the prestigious university from Kerala, Cochin University of Science and Technology, one of the prominent universities in science and technology in India. And she worked as a corporate executive, multinational, serving the multinational communities also, like the companies of Hewlett Packard, India Sales Private Limited, Citibank, Xerox, like companies she already have experience of 11 years in 11 years in industry and academia. She has presented many research papers in national and international conferences and published several papers in leading journals. And she also secured many awards: K.N. Raj Fellowship Awards, Young Scientist Award from International Development Research Center, and many Best Paper Awards in 2013, 2017 under UGC sponsored conferences in India. A blend of corporate career with academia, I feel, and we feel Dr. Raswin will be the best resource person, can share you the ideas which are connected to the current topic. On the behalf of Africa Business School, let me cordially invite you, Dr. Roswin Joy. Now, the platform is yours. Warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Dilip Kumar. I'm so obliged to be part of this, but this great event and initiative. It is a good initiative could be followed across the business schools to enlighten young minds and guide them in the right direction of research, research application, and research publication. So let me get into my. I'm just sharing my slides. One second. So today I'm going to discuss with you on disaster risk management, the light of COVID-19 pandemic. As you all know, this year is often called as the year of COVID-19 rather than anything else. All, all because we all, across the world, we are suffering because of this disaster, and naturally there is lot of enthusiasm and interest going up in related to how to manage this this particular disaster, and while we manage this disaster, how is it affecting various industries, various sectors in our economy, our bilateral relationship, as well as how we manage our resources. So all these questions have all players in place, not only household and communities, but government and the firms. So, in this interdependent, interwoven scenario of a particular, as we pass through this disaster, let us understand how to address this topic and analyze it in a research mindful manner. So, what is this disaster risk means? In specific definition, it means a loss of life, injury, or a, a destroyed or a damaged asset which occur to a society or a community because in a particular period of time because of any of the three variables like hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. When you have any of these three things together or some of it alone, it leads to disaster risk. So major components are hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. What is this hazard? It is the process, phenomenon, or a human action which leads to a loss of life, injury, or other health impacts. So that is a hazard. And when what is the condition of a particular asset or a person when a hazard occur? That is exposure. And the vulnerability is the condition determined by the physical, social, and economic and environmental factors of how the particular resource is able is susceptible to this particular hazard. So when these three combine, it leads to a disaster. So if why COVID-19 is a disaster, because it is a phenomena which has occurred, and we are facing a lot of losses in time of in terms of life, in terms of livelihood, and a lot of assets are destroyed or value has deteriorated. So we can consider it as a disaster. And disaster risk management is the application of this, how to reduce the disaster and what all are the policies and strategies which can be adopted to reduce the disaster and to manage it, to mitigate it. And there will be some after effects of each disaster which will be prolonging in an economy and in an industry. How can we resolve this? So this is what we call it as disaster risk management. As management PhDs in management, disaster risk management is very important because it affect any disaster will affect in any industry or a segment. And understanding the disaster and how to resolve this in your context will help you in whichever field you choose to enhance your knowledge. It can be in finance or business analytics or HR or marketing, whichever domain you are continuing your PhD. This information will help you to come up with policies and processes to mitigate the effect of uh, disasters. So let's see what is happening worldwide. Worldwide, if you really look at the statistics, we can see that the number of disasters occurring in year by year is actually increasing towards 400 range. When I look at Africa, as specifically of Africa, from 1980 to 2008, we have found that around 1,699 events has happened, and then the statistics shows the number of people killed, average diseased people, number of people affected. Means it can be a loss of life. It's not only loss of life, it can be a disease occur, or they lost their job. So how this is the statistics of the region getting affected. And this is a very interesting data. The the natural disaster occurrence reports, this is from the UN, we can see that this is particularly to Africa context. I found that epidemic is the highest one, but further analysis of the data shows that after that it is flood, and then followed by drought and storm. These are the four disasters which is affecting Africa more. But if you really look into the statistics of economic loss, it is earthquake which is causing the highest economic loss in Africa, while drought is causing the highest the loss of life. So this is a a scenario which could be studied when the epidemic you are though the number of epidemic occurrence of epidemic is increasing, it is large in number. Some way it has come up with managing that disaster to a great level, and Africa would be able to throw up a lot of insight on how to handle the pandemic disease scenario to the world, because it has reduced the loss, economic loss, and also deceased people number is less comparing to comparatively. So this is very interesting, and honestly I started looking I mostly work on Asian contest, and I was looking to African contest, and I was so interested with this particular graph of how this is happening.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the participants are asking if you could put the full screen view because they cannot see the text clearly.
1 second, I'm so sorry. This is a graph which I was discussing. So we were the point I was discussing is the number of number of occurrence of epidemic is very high. At the same time, the next is followed by flood. This is African contest, but when we look in the statistics of statistics, we can find that the economic loss is higher in earthquake, and the loss of life is higher in drought occurrence. While epidemic has, though the number of occurrence is higher, the economic loss and loss of life has been lesser comparatively. So I feel like there will be some lessons which we can get from Africa for the entire world in this pandemic scenario. So when we look at the COVID-19 scenario, currently it is increasing. This is the current worldwide scenario, and in Africa, especially Morocco, I found that the level has been now around 8,000. This is the statistics is Africa, and the graph is of Morocco and specifically. So when we discuss about the disasters, we have the UN from 1990 onwards was much interested in understanding and finding ways and means to manage disasters, and it has proposed the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. It is 2015 to 2030. It has been adopted in the third UN World Conference in Sendai, Japan, in March 2015. Along with that, there are various SDG goals which pertain to the disaster risk management. SDG goals are there which pertain directly contribute to the disaster risk management. Also, the goal number 1, 11, and 13, which talk about reducing the number of loss of life and property. So there are SDGs also. However, today I will be looking. I wish to introduce the Sendai framework for a disaster risk reduction. I'm just I'm just sharing another document. 1 second. Okay, can you see, Hosna? Are you able to see this?
Yeah, we can see.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so this is the Sendai framework for disaster reduction, which is adopted from 2015 to 2030. The scope of the Sendai framework is that it can be applied to very small scale grassroots level as well as a large scale pandemic like situation, or a very the small regional level flu like situation also frequent, and it is it can be anything like a natural disaster, natural, or it can be a man-made disaster. It can apply, and it can also it can be because environmental related or technology related, or it can be a biology hazard. Now, COVID-19 is a biological hazard. It already encompass such disaster can be studied with this framework, and this can be adopted in any of your PhD work also, because it's a wonderful framework to explore. And its main outcome is to reduce the disaster risk or and loss in lives and livelihood and health, and in the health. And main goal is to reduce the existing disaster risk through the implementation of integrating an inclusive economic, structural, legal, social, health, cultural, educational, environment, technological, political, and institutional measures. So it's a plethora of things. All it is like interdisciplinary. It's what it shows. It's a very multidisciplinary in nature. Disaster cannot be managed with one subject or with one organization. It is a network of institutions are required, and multiple it's an interdisciplinary approach is required when we address the disaster risk. That is why the goals are so encompassed. Then when I look into the major aspect of this particular targets is to ensure there is no loss of life, to reduce the number of life which is lost, livelihoods which is lost, economic loss we need to reduce, and also the damage to infrastructure and destruction we need to reduce. And also we need a better coordination between different countries and countries in managing the disasters. These are the targets of this Sendai network. And if you really look into priority for action, this is the actual see the analytical work will come here in priority 1, 2, 3, and 4. The first one is to understand disaster risk. Here we analyze what is the level of hazard, what is the level of vulnerability exposed, and what is the level of risk being managed. That is what we understand in this priority 1. In priority 2, we try to understand what is the governance measures, who all can manage the disaster. It can be done individually, collectively, only government, or through corporate level interference. So how it is getting managed. Next is priority is investing in how we can reduce the disaster risk. Okay, so that will ensure, so especially it is like changing a bringing in structural or non-structural measures, like maybe it can be through a new methodology adopted, it can be a new innovation, or it can be in some measures to reduce the economic loss. So and also if you really look the Kerala story of COVID-19, why they were able to though in India, first COVID case was reported from Kerala. But if you really look into the number of people affected by COVID-19, or the number of people, deceased people, it is much lesser comparing to other states who were end up having COVID spread at a later stage. The major reason is because of the third point, I think, is the investing in disaster risk reduction by the state, because they have invested a lot on public health infrastructure during the previous disasters, which we had, okay, the floods, we had Nipah virus, we had. So that has helped us in this. So what is the level of those investing in disaster reduction, that for resilience? That is the priority 3. And the last one is the enhancing the disaster preparedness for effective response, build back better. So even if after we have a disaster, always the first priority is to reduce the impact of disaster, definitely, and next will be how to build back the scenario better. So that is the next one. So how are those initiatives happening, and what is happening in that area is the priority 4. These are the 4 pillars of the Sendai framework, which actually help us to understand the disaster risk management scenarios. So this is there are a lot of guiding principle. You can look into it at a later stage. This is a framework which is applicable till 2030. It was very 2020 was a very crucial year for this framework as well, because it actually we were in the process of evaluating whether from 2020 to 2030 we are trying to see we reduce the disaster impact. But unfortunately 2020 become a very an year of extremes. So I don't think we can use as in statistics we can't use extremes to generalize. So that is what the Sendai network, Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction framework, which can be used in your research works. Now I am sharing my slides back again. So this framework is there. So this framework can be adopted to understand the effect of a particular disaster on an industry, so like airlines industry, or a sector like agriculture sector, or an economy as a whole. It may be African economy as a whole, or for a particular regional economy, or the bilateral relationship between two countries. It can be studied. All these things we can study through this Sendai framework. So that is what is explained here. So for future research opportunities, as I said, you can work on how the disaster is affecting a particular sector from an industry point of view. Also it can affect various trade practices and barriers which are between countries. Also the economic growth like GDP growth, those things, how the disaster is impacting the economy. Then the resource sharing, especially when you are sharing a resource like two countries share a river. So when a disaster occur in that particular river, what will because it get flooded or something like that, how this resource sharing has to be managed. So these things has to be can be studied. These are the things which has lot of scope to study in future research opportunities. A lot of work has to be done in the light of COVID-19 itself. We can study, and even as disaster risk management from other aspects also, there are a lot of very less work honestly in this area, because disaster risk management become a title of discussion only from 1990, which is means that it is pretty young and uh, in the academia. So what I thought is I will come up with a work which I have already done and show what kind of analysis I have done and estimated things, and how I found this disaster risk management in certain in an area. Not COVID-19, because COVID-19 I cannot do because it's ongoing and we cannot it will not be a full work. It will not so I have looked into a work which I have already done. It is a scenario of climate sensitive aquaculture. Aquaculture is a culture of fish. It's like an industrial production of fish is what is happening in aquaculture, and it is very sensitive to climate change. Also the water is polluted, it get affected. This is a disaster because it leads to a lot of economic loss, and also it also leads to various infrastructure loss. Especially the aquaculture require a lot of infrastructure is required in the pond, and it get deteriorated. So it's a disaster by its definition, and how it is getting managed. So what I have done is I first try to this is with regarding to a study which I have already done on disaster risk management in related to aquaculture, which is climate sensitive. Here I try to understand what is the how water quality as an input, which is which changes due to pollution and climate variability. It affect the aquaculture production, which contribute to our food and nutritional security. So these are all related to SDGs basically. So for to this study, I have used Vembanad Cold Wetland. It's a Ramsar site. It's a very big. It's one of the second biggest wetland in India itself. And I have divided this wetland to 3 zones. And in each zones I have taken 2 panchayats, which is called, is like a province. Okay, panchayat is a local name here. So when I first assessed the water quality of aquaculture farms, I found, see, this aquaculture farms work from November to May, April, mid of April. So when we look into the water quality, what happens is, and they generally, what happened, they put the seeds in the month of November. When we looked into water quality for the and index data, we found that the water quality is relatively poor when the shrimp, the fry is the seed for the aquaculture. The fry is at a very younger age. The water quality is very bad, and only from February water is good. So by the time it become January, the fishes are already dead. So they cannot not able to manage the harvest. That was the issue which I tried to prop. How can we handle this disaster? How can we quantify this disaster and tell the policy makers to bring solutions? Because we have a lot of farmers, they just small and medium scale farmers who actually do it for their livelihood and for their subsistence. So this is an aquaculture scenario which I can see. This is the where the canoe is there. It's the river, and from this river they take water to the farms. Okay, so this is how the water is getting. This is a connection between water and the river. The resource from there draw the water to the farm, and this is the infrastructure they use to let the water in, as well as the seeds, the feed, everything for the farm comes through this way only. So this is the infrastructure. So this study, my objective was to understand what is the risk, this basically the what is the risk level, and which is the disaster level, and then how it is getting managed by them. Okay, so this is my framework, which is which has I have used the IAD framework, which is a different framework, but it can encompass the Sendai framework also. So here I have used the water quality variables, how the water quality is affecting, and then what kind of risk is there, and characterize that risk and how it is getting managed, and then getting into the policy. Here I am only talking about the two, no, the entire framework is not covered. I will be discussing only the risk part and the risk management part here, because we are working on the risk management aspect. So I use the secondary data from Pollution Control Board, and the primary data was collected from 222 farms in the farms, and water quality was estimated with very water quality variables like temperature, salinity, pH, DO, ammonia, and nitrate. And then I have indexed it and found out and given the color codings. And I found that our in the lake, the northern part is very good water quality, while the central part is poor, and in southern part it is very poor. So this was first thing. So one thing I want to though I'm an economist, I whenever you get into a disaster risk management work, you have to understand one thing. We need to understand the science behind that. Otherwise, we cannot give solutions to this particular disaster management policies, because it is not because it's a multidisciplinary means it need multiple disciplines to solve the problem. So I have used the water quality and I have used the chemistry part of it to understand the scenario. Now, because of this water quality being changing, what happens is that there will be hazards. Hazards I have discussed what. Then now we are getting into the framework, Sendai framework. So hazard here it is mortality of the fish and shrimp, morbidity in retarded growth. Okay, that is what is hazard. So you can see that the fish, how it is, the fish being they will be dead, and they will be coming to the sides of the lake. So that is mortality. Morbidity, their color change, we can see the color change between two fish. One is green and another one is pink. The pink one is the morbidity, deceased one. Then also if you see the collection of one day collection is very poor. They have a very retarded growth, and the production is lost. So this is what we see in a hazard level. So this can be applied in a COVID-19 scenario also. Like if you really look into agrarian agricultural farmers, the studies about agricultural farmers, you can see what about the mortality level, morbidity level, whether because they are not able to work in the farms, it leads to retarded growth among their farm produce, which end up in production loss. So these can be we can map it to the COVID-19 scenario also. This is hazard affected population, and then I have use this particular formulas to understand the risk. So risk here, though in the first slide I have told, it is a combination of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Technically, for disaster risk management, there are 5 definitions, and the most prominent one used is these days is UN after the UN 2015 proclamation of Sendai framework. It is risk, exposure, and vulnerability. Here, what I have used is risk is equal to probability of and consequence, that is exposure into consequence. So this is what the definition I have used. So whenever you use whatever definition is used, you just have to stick to it and build your analytical framework based on it, and do your analysis based on it. Here I have used risk is equal to probability into consequence, and so I have found out that what is the level of mortality. So each variables here, the variables are mortality, disease, and retarded growth. I found that, and then I found out the affected area in the study zone, and then I have found out what is the exposure. Exposure is average days of mortality. All these 3 components itself, what is the average days, then the probability of the disease. Probability of the disease is the number of days, average days you had a particular variable, that's mortality, for example, divided by the number of years you are considering, last 5 years, or how you are defining it. So that will give you the exposure assessment. Then you can find out the consequence assessment, which is the cost part, economics part of it. It's talk about what is the damage cost, what is the damage cost operation. See, whenever we have a disaster, we need to spend a certain extra amount to come out from that, manage that disaster. So that is what is we call as damage cost operation. Then I would have lost an opportunity because I face a particular disaster. That is opportunity cost, which it has a technical way of doing it also. So then we use the formula to find out the consequence. It's a formula which has been already shared early in the slide. So and then we found out the exposure to consequence will give you the risk assessment. So you can see that I found that in the southern zone of the country, where the water quality is very bad, risk is very high. At the same time, when the water quality is very good in north zone, but the risk factor is much more worse than the central zone, where the water quality is medium. So this is again in south zone water quality is very bad and risk is also very bad, but somehow we can find out the central zone has managed the risk better than the north zone, where the water quality is better. So this is leads to how we are managing that risk. So here I'm not getting into the finding, I'm getting into the risk management part. I have used Postman and Jorgensen and used the Minimax indexing model. This is a very interesting work. You can, if you want, you can use the reference, and it's been used by World Bank also for their farmers risk management strategies. So it can be applied. So I identified that we can find that the risk, when you are facing a risk, you have it can be 3 ways, 3 strategies are there. One, it is risk reduction. Risk, how I can reduce my current level of risk of X to X minus 1. That is risk reduction. How I can reduce it. Next strategy is mitigation. Mitigation means how I can move my risk to a different different level, or it can be a different person, it can be a different organization or different farm, on how I can mitigate it. Then it is coping or adaptation. It is like how we can, if okay, I can't reduce it, I can't move it to somebody else, now my only way is to adapt it, I have to live with it. So now we tell no, we COVID-19, we have to live with it. It's giving you a hint that okay, you have to adapt to this COVID-19 scenario, there is no other way. So we cannot reduce it fully, we cannot mitigate it fully. Then what to do? The last strategy is adapt to it. So we need to have a better lifestyle and better way of doing things in a COVID-19 scenario. So here I found, and when these are the different strategies: risk reduction, risk mitigation, coping or adaptation. These strategies can be applied in your industry as well. So when you are facing a particular risk, it can be economic loss, or it can be a disaster, or simply any kind of risk. You can either reduce it, either mitigate it, or you can see. Any questions? Or you have to adapt to it. So these strategies again can be applied to attend as an individual strategy, as a collective strategy. Also, it government can provide, or the market can also give. It is not just one person or one organization. There are multiple levels and layers of how the risk management can happen. This is from a resource management perspective. It is applicable into industry level also. As a company, how you can reduce the risk. Also, you can collaborate, you can have a JV, or or collectively how you are doing, or you can approach government for support, or maybe you find a better way of doing it in the market and adopt it. So this is applicable across. So the strategies can be three types, and the actors can be it can be individual, collective, public, or market based. In my study, I found under each one, what all are the strategies which farmers has adopted, and this has helped me. And then further, I have indexed it, and it is in the individual. It is we have found that pond preparation, how they prepare the pond, is much better than the other zones, especially south zone. I said the risk is high. Their pond preparation is worse than the northern zone and central zone, where the risk is less. Then everybody adopt PCR tested seeds to reduce the virus impact. Then the northern zone find more they are using more probiotics and chemicals. Okay, and so we have a lot of strategies under each header here, which will help us to find out. We cannot tell that which one strategy is better than another. It is situation specific. Some situation maybe it can be only managed collectively. For example, in the central location, why they are able to manage the risk better is because they were to a great extent able to collectively, they were looking for collective action, because the water quality is bad. So what they were doing is, if the outlet of a particular farm's water will become an inlet for the next farm. So what they do is they coordinate their efforts, like at same time they will let out the water and let in the water, so that it will not affect the somebody else disease prone, it will not get spread fast. So these kind of collective measures was adopted by the central zone in the lake to reduce the disease. So various strategies, and this has been indexed using this formula which I have put it. It is there in Minimax indexing method is what I have used. It is I have done a Likert scale questionnaire survey and used this Minimax indexing method to come up with these numbers. It will be between 0 to 1. Okay, and more people use it, it will be towards 1, and when less people use it, it will be towards 0. So that is how it is been. It has to be read, and different strategies, and how it is fare well, it is shown here. Uh, so this is how we can, really run a risk assessment. Disaster risk management work assessment. And first you have to estimate it. Then you have to identify the risk aspects. What is posing the risk? I identified that it is water quality is the risk which is causing the farm to bring economic loss. First, I identified it, and then I estimated it to understand what is the level of risk in a particular area. And I have also analyzed how it, in a different type of farms, like if it is a monoculture and polyculture, how it, which is not explained here in this particular presentation. But I have we analyzed it, and then how we manage it. This process can be adopted in any disaster management situation, where first you understand uh, what is the identify the risk aspect. Okay, for example, COVID-19. What is the risk aspect? You will lose a life. You will lose your livelihood. Is the biggest one. So that is the first thing we need to find out. Okay, and then I identify it, then I estimated it, and then I try to see what all are the strategies which can be adopted to manage it, which become my actually two analytical chapters, frankly speaking. This is how we can apply a disaster risk management study. And whenever we study, we need to I'm just getting into some of the research ethics which I was asked to communicate, especially as a PhD scholars or about any PhD or any research work. Research ethics, doing it in an ethical way, is very important. Interestingly, India government has now put across a notification. UGC is the University Grant Commission of India, has now put across a notification that every PhD scholar, MPhil scholar has to undergo a 2-credit course in research ethics from this academic year onwards, because this give research ethics is very important in every researcher's life, because that will regulate the our research ethics will define the value norms of how you do it. When you, as you are the first batch of the of African Business School researchers, the ethics and value systems you create, you follow, will be followed by your juniors also. That will be, because that will even though we will have a plethora of values and norms and various institutional arrangement, every institution will have its own way of managing things. So the norms, values, and institutional arrangements you come up with in your PhD program will be the first level of ethics which we of ethics in of research in ABS. So it is, first of all, it's not a tool. It's a tool. It's not a legislation. It is not binded by law, but it's a tool to help us to do research in a better way. And it covers many things. It is not only your PhD program. It also your how there will be some research related activities such as teaching. You will be teaching some arts, conduct classes will be there. How it should be done, how you will disseminate your research output in form of papers, conference, or white papers, or how you are going to do it. Then the expert. Then how institutionally, what all are the binding things which you need to follow. So also it is not only the doctoral research fellows, but if you are doing a mini project for a master's program also, research ethics is applicable there as well. If you are supporting any master's students in their dissertation, there also you need to see the research ethics part. Also, the consulting firms, they are also binded to use these research ethics which is followed. And the major point are the relationship between research, society, and ethics. So how are they related? It can be like norms and value of a research, and the freedom of a researcher. What is the responsibility of a individual and the society? How you will see. The interlinkages. You have to be very when you are doing a research ethically, you need to be sensitive to the relationship between your research finding and the society, immediate society, which will be beneficiary of it, or so we should be very sure that it should not be backfire them in any form. Then respect for individuals. So when we do a research work, you have to be, especially if you are your work related to children or people who are deceased, your work has an element of that. Then when we term it in our work, it has to be it should be used in a way which will not hurt others feeling, or should not create a issue for the parties involved. Respect for groups and institutions. It is regarding to the institution you are under which you do your research. You have to be very clear about what are the research norms which are put across by the research institute. And research committee, I will come back. Commission research is a research which you are you have been funded with some certain organization for your research work. How it will be dealing with and dissemination of research, how you will be disseminating your research information. Research community, in that will come under the research committee. We have all these these 9 points. Co-authorship. How will you give co-authorship to your paper? Or see, you are confused how to give co-authorship. Yes, it is very clear. 4 criteria only you have to see. One is if anybody has contributed to the the conceptual or conceptual framework of your research work, they should be acknowledged. Also, if somebody has supported in manuscript or doing an analysis, they should be acknowledged. Also, the final work should be the person who is involved should be able to acknowledge his involvement after seeing the final output in form of a paper or or of a project report. And also he should be liable to, or he should acknowledge that uh, he hold to whatever is being told in that paper. He say, oh, I only do that analytical part only, rest of the things I don't know. That is not co-authorship. It doesn't fit to be a co-authorship. Then good citation practices. It is very important. You need to, when you cite, even if it is your own work you are using in a second paper or a project report, you have already written a paper and you are writing a project report. You need to cite your own work because it's already an output which is already published. Then it has to be, it should not be taken for granted and left. Plagiarism is duplication basically. It is like sometimes some people ask me, olden times, I don't, if you put in inverted commas, it means I copy paste from another paper, but I put in inverted comma and put the person's name in bracket. It's still plagiarism. It's a misconcept in our research community sometimes. I mean, it has been changed so much in some places, but it's still there in some places. It is plagiarism. You have to when you use a paper's information, it is the key message which you have acquired from that paper is what you have to write in the paper. It is not you copy paste from that paper and put it across in your paper. That is plagiarism. Plagiarism is also you take up somebody else's conceptual framework, idea or method without quoting them is also plagiarism. We have to be very clear about the scientific integrity and data sharing practices. These days people ask for data sharing in a paper also. When you try to publish, they ask for database. And that time you have to be very clear if you are a very sensitive information is there. whether that data can be shared or not. So those things has to be taken care of. And also, I've been working with Dr. Fikret Bucks. He is from University of Manitoba. So he told me that is one first. I mean, I was a beginner. I was just starting my research, so I was just I was so inclined to come back from field and tell this is because of this reason, because the women, they don't talk about that and all those things. So he tell me, see, a researcher should be away from four things: one, gender, income, status, okay, region, and language. In case of India, caste also. So unless we are moved out of it, we have to be impartial about it. Okay, then I think I will take some questions. We are running out of time. These are the major points in research ethics, and that's it. Uh, uh, any questions?
Thank you, Professor Joy, for the presentation. I'm Kautar, I'm PhD student in ABS. I have
Yes.
two questions, and
Okay.
the first question is related to risk assessment in the COVID-19 disaster. How do you assess risks related to COVID-19? Especially it has a ripple effect on so many aspects of life of people.
Yes. Uh, yes, if you ask me regarding to see, we can follow these variables, whatever is, because in disaster risk, these are the major variables which are, used to assess the disaster. One is mortality because of COVID-19. What is the mortality level, morbidity level, disease? It means it has sub variables also, like how many days you fall sick, and how many days because of sickness you were not able to go for your work, because of sometimes it is for because of your disease, other person, I was sick but I was not knowing it, but because of I was knowing it, I spread it to somebody else. All these things are points to assess the risk, the COVID-19, and so the retarded growth. This can be uh, in terms of your income. Your income means I have stopped my investments because COVID-19. I'm so insecure that I may be employed for a longer period of time. So my income is still coming, but I am not investing it. So this is again a point for retarded growth. Then also we can say your productivity in terms of because of COVID-19, I'm not able to manage my productivity in the level which is required. So which I used to work. So these points are your starting points even in a COVID-19 situation to identify the hazards, which is these mortality, morbidity, retarded growth, and production loss. Start from there, then you can understand what is the exposure level. Assess the exposure level using there are many frameworks to do it. One is this, which is this I what is the probability and the consequence of it. So probability is very less in case of COVID-19. I mean, right now we tell, but if you tell, you check it after 6 months, this probability may go up, because maybe you are becoming sick again and again. I mean, a person who have recovered from COVID-19 can fall sick again because he got uh, again if infected. So the probability of it rate will go up. Then the consequence is your the economic cost of it, that will give you, and then multiply it, you will get the risk level. Risk estimation can be done using this frame.
Thank you very much for your answer. I have a second question, which is, like, what are the major changes that countries should adopt to mitigate a disaster like COVID-19?
Because if we really look into, of course, governments are working in terms of bringing in monetary measures and fiscal measures. The recent update with been more initially we all looked into monetary measures like making inflow of money becoming cheaper. I mean, in effect, money become cheaper, like loans become cheaper. That is what happened immediately, immediate monetary measures. But we say that in a condition like pandemic, where structural changes are required, like we may have to come up with, see, a different technology, so a different way of doing things. See, I'm doing a webinar all back from India, in India only because COVID-19, because of this new scenarios which has come, right? So, I mean, this kind of opportunities, there will be some opportunities which are coming up and some opportunities which are losing also. I'm no more going to office. Office and doing so what kind of fiscal reforms are also required, that is also very important in this scenario. Not only monetary measures, fiscal measures also. And the other part is to the in the Sendai framework we have one. Am I sharing? I think I'm sharing. Share. Yes. So if you really look into this entire framework here, in the priority 3, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, that is what the government should focus on immediately. Okay, other after they are able to cope up with it, investing in, and also how we will build back better. These priority 3 and priority 4 of the framework can has to be initiated at the government level, and community will follow. But in the priority 1 and priority 2, it can be initiated from the community or individual level and supported by the government. So from a government perspective, they have to focus on priority 3 and priority 4 in the Sendai framework. That is what government should do.
Yeah, thank you. Don't you think that like the perspective of government will change after this COVID-19 crisis? Like the traditional ways of risk mitigation will change like in drastic way.
Yes, traditional mitigation measures can influence, but definitely it require a lot of changes, because we have to use technology in bigger way. That
Yeah.
is one thing, especially that is we cannot manage things in a traditional way alone. Traditional knowledge system is always a bigger value addition in our managing pandemic or epidemics. But at the same time, we have to adopt technology, and also there will be institutional change, govern how the government manage it. It has to be also may change the way the government manage it. It's like it's very reactionary at this currently how government manage it. It is very much reactionary rather than a pre-planned. And if it is a reactionary, then it will become the vulnerabilities will come up faster out. It become a disaster faster, frankly speaking. That is this means if our measures or our policies are reactionary in nature, okay, that bring out the vulnerability in a system, and it leads to make a risk to a disaster. But if we are uh, if our policies and programs are not reactionary, but at the same time it's pre-planned, and their system is able to build up resilience to this kind of disasters, naturally we will be able to do better.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. It was very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? I could find one message.
Hello?
Yes.
It's Iman Lokiri, a PhD student at Africa Business School UNSXP. Thank you, Yusuf, for your presentation.
Yes.
My question is, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So my question is, during this period of pandemic, and concerning the preparedness of a specific country, how can we measure the preparedness of the country in general, so as to integrate it in its policy?
See, it has a disaster resilience framework is there, which could give you more light on this. So but as from a question point of view, the preparedness will be reflecting in the way the infrastructure is made. So, for example, in the COVID-19 scenario, how is our public health infrastructure? How many hospitals we have, how many how are they, how fast it can connect to the local community. Okay, because it's a grassroots level, how much they can penetrate, how fast the community can get the service from them. So it will define our preparedness of how fast, and also it is a must in as per the, it is a Sendai framework also. They insist that it will be better we have a disaster management committee at the national and the local level, and they are well connected, which will help us to handle these scenarios in a better way. So what are the interlinkages between the international, national and regional levels? That is one way which will show up as our preparedness. How strong are our infrastructure to address disasters? That is another level. Do we have a disaster mitigation fund which will be used which can be used immediately after if a disaster strikes? And how fast what are the senior, whether the government have a plan of how fast they can bring back the build back the economy. What are the measures they have in mind to build back? So because across the any country you take, they are now looking at various ideas, looking for ideas on how to build back their economy in post COVID-19. So recently, I had done a presentation on a project, how to write a project proposal, and then one of my participants from a webinar, she just messaged today that she has submitted a proposal. It is on how to build back Goa economy post COVID-19. So see, these all shows how well, these all shows how we can be prepared to bounce back as an economy post a disaster. It is how well our networks are, how well our economic condition are, how well our infrastructures are. These are the 3 points which will lead you to bounce back or show the preparedness of us to address a disaster.
Okay, thank you very much, madam.
Yes. I think there is a question from Rahul Amin Taludar and follow-up discussion. What potential disaster communication have in reducing disaster risks? Which appreciate if you could shed some light. Actually, this is one of my favorite interesting topic which I am also working on in risk communication. Risk communication is a one of the important area where a lot of focus has to go in research, because we really don't know how to communicate a risk in a risk or a disaster. Especially the language we use in our newspapers or our media, popular media, and also how to manage the fake news. All those things are very important. At the same time, more than that, whether the communication is going to mitigate any of the disaster effects. Okay, so that is more important, but that is never focused while we do any disaster communication. It is more or create panic and increase value of circulation is what is always focused. It is never communication of risk can is it is a very limited information you will find on how to cope up with a particular disaster, or how to mitigate a disaster, or how to adapt to a disaster. What are the measures for to be taken for those things are always secondary. That is one of the major problem in risk communication. And even one of the Earth System Governance Framework, which is another framework which has been very active in disaster risk management, they have uh, told that one of the major aspect which you have to focus in current scenario is on risk communication. So it's a good topic to be researched. Yes, any other questions, or is it Professor Dilip or Husna?
Yes, Professor.
Yes. Anything else? If not,
I don't know if they have other question. I'm wondering. Okay, so there are no more questions. So on behalf of the Africa Business School, we thank you for serving as the speaker for today's webinar. Your comments on how to cope up with risk management were very inspiring for our PhD scholars. So once again, we thank you for your contribution in today's webinar, and we hope to see you again. And we count on you on providing and supporting and giving guideship for our PhD scholars.
I'll be very happy to support your team whenever I'm be always be happy to any requirement you can be reach out. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Husna, for helping out on the webinar. And I wish to thank Professor Dilip Kumar, who has introduced me to this webinar. Thank you so much for both of you for giving an opportunity to understand African Business School and various programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Char. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.